Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. A Glimpse of the Kingdom can remain free because of generous donors like you. If you'd like to donate, feel free to do so online, or you can send payments through Facebook Messenger. Don't forget to tell your friends about it so that they can enjoy this ministry as well. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any podcasts.
You can listen to my daddy every single day, like in the gym, in the car, or just at home. Glimpse of the Kingdom is awesome!
We're talking about deontology. Just to remind you, we're talking about morality. That rings the bell. We've been reflecting on what morality is, how to define it, where it comes from. Those are all in your handouts. We've covered that. I'm not going to do a long review on that. What we're talking about right now, tonight, and next time as you wrap up, are the answers to this question. The question is, how do I know what the right thing to do is? That's it. So how do I know what the right thing to do is? So in life, I gave a thought experiment, which is really normal in philosophy and ethics to give thought experiments. Let me give you a different one versus the whole thing that killing a guy over medicine, because that freaks some of y'all out. So I'm going down the road, and there's apparently a car's on fire. Someone had a car wreck. There's smoke billowing out. And I realize the person's really in danger. The car might blow up. Well, when I see that, I see, as Lewis said, I'm going to have competing instincts, or instincts of moral values, like keys on the keyboard. They're all there. I'm going to have an instinct that tells me, run! Preserve my own human life. Get the heck out of Dodge. That thing's going to blow. I'm going to have another moral value instinct that says, save a life. Do what it takes to save a life, right? I mean, probably preserve someone else's life. Even if they're not my family, I'll have some kind of instinct I ought to help them. I might some other things. I might have other instincts that go on. But right away, as soon as I'm in front of any kind of situation where there's an ethical decision, I'm forced with a moral dilemma. And what I've been arguing the first several weeks is that this, and stay with me here, that the impulse that we have, that there is a right, and that I ought to do the right thing, I argue and believe is a universal human condition. We might call it the moral law. Morality exists. There is good, there is evil. There's a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do. I think that's a universal impulse. I think that's universal. The second thing is, well, then the quagmire comes in, well, okay, in that scenario, or in scenarios all the time in life, how do I know what to do? What should I do right there in the moment? And this is what most people in this class keep asking, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? Which you should, because that's that applied ethics when we think about what should I do in this situation. Well, then I've answered over and over and over, probably to your fatigue, it depends on which ethical system you're adopting. And there's three biggies: deontology, consequentialism, and virtue ethics. Those are three major systems. And we've only talked about one. Tonight we're going to talk about the second one, and the next time we'll talk about the third one. So, in deontology, which means that which we ought to do, as fiat in Latin does mean, remember your Latin of course, comes from the Latin root word fiat. So fiat means let it be accomplished, let it be done. That's the commandment, from fiat, the verb. Anyway, so that's a commandment. What should we do? What's the duty? So just remind you, just some of this is a reminder, if you're new, and maybe it's still pretty new. A moral value, think in the abstract, like preserving human life, my life, others' life, or family life. You can be, there's honesty, loyalty, kindness, bravery. I can make a long list of things that are good to do, just in general, like moral values. Does that make sense? Tell me if not. It's okay. There's really genuine, no dumb questions. These are moral values that I've been trying to argue. I think the average human, outside of a disorder, a literal sociopathy or psychopathy disorder, most humans believe there are moral values in life. Then the question is, which one do I choose? Which note do I play on the moral value keyboard? That's the duty. So you put a duty into a diaper. I'm just kidding. You put a duty into a commandment. All you parents out there. The moral duty, the question mark is, which one do I choose? And to put honesty into a duty, I would say, what? Two in a sentence for me. My moral duty to be honest is to tell the truth. That's my duty. Well, okay, well, someone says, that's your choice. Well, no, in this situation, you should choose to be loyal. Well, this situation, the duty you have is to be kind versus blank. But we all do it. We all choose which moral values, and the duty says that's the one you ought to choose. But to find out the moral duty, that depends on the ethical system you choose, whether it's deontology, consequentialism, and virtue. In deontology, we focus on moral duties or rules. And I tried to emphasize last time that you can pick, the first big question of deontology is which rules do you pick? And atheists can pick rules. Anybody in the world can pick a set of rules. To save, and I talked about Immanuel Kant and some other things. To save time, since I'm going to assume a lot of us here are Christians, most Christians go to the Bible for rules. I'm going to come back there in a second. But the first thing is you say which rules. Two is you say, now how do I apply them? Now let me pause there, be very dramatic, one more time. In deontology, the moral duty is not based on the outcome. That's consequentialism. It's not based on how it forms your character. That's virtue ethics. In deontology, the moral duty is chosen by how you weight the values, how you prioritize them. That's how you choose. Because a deontologist would say the values themselves are intrinsically good or bad, and some are intrinsically right or wrong, which ones you should choose more than other ones. So what a deontologist will say is the moral duty is determined by how you categorize them. You rank them, or they call it the weight of the rules, the weight of them. And rules don't think they're legalist. I'm saying this again. Well, they just want to earn salvation. No, it's about how to make moral choices. And in general, most deontologists categorize moral values. You can make a list 20, 30, 40 of them, I don't know. And then Chelsea says, well, I want to rank them in order. Which ones are the most important? The ones that, are there any values I will never break? Even if they killed me, I would never break it. The never break rules, they call those absolute rules. The rules that are really, really, really important, and you don't break them hardly ever unless you just happen to have a moral value that beats it. That's prima facie, at face value. Most people, I think, stay in this category if you're a good person. A lot of moral values are good. The rule of thumb means, yeah, in general it's good to do, but it's not nearly as important as the other ones. It's almost always at the bottom of the list. Well, David, how would a person choose which category to put him in? Well, as a human being, you get to choose that. A deontologist would say, probably they would say is, it depends on the rules you choose. But remember, I gave you a list. Here are the 4 things most people choose. Absolute, you never break, right? In prima facie, at first face value, you say you only choose one that beats the absolute or beats another one when there are better reasons for the other choice, and it can be defended publicly. It's a last resort. We should seek the action that least violates the principles being overridden, and usually you feel guilty when you broke it, and you have to apologize. So it's a big deal to choose one or the other one. So it doesn't matter the consequence in deontology at all. What matters is how you categorize your moral values, and that's how you choose in the moment. So, for example, most people would say preservation of human life is an absolute or near it. And usually they'll say others and family. Maybe some categorize it differently. Some might say my family is number 1, others number 2, and myself 3. But in general, the right thing to do is to help other people's life be saved. I mean, most people would say that. If not, if in general you think your life is more important to be saved, most people say, well, no, you're being either a coward, which breaks bravery, or you're being selfish. So back to my analogy of a burning car. And you see someone, you say, well, I got to preserve human life, preserve theirs or preserve mine. Most people are going to say, what's the moral thing to do? What's the duty there? You should do what you should try to do. Huh? Most people would save the person. What did you say? Help them out. Most people say that would be the right thing to do, even if it killed you. Right? Because you're putting yourself into danger. Because the moral law tells you now the right thing to do right now is that. A deontologist would say You choose that because you put it high up on your list. That's why I put it up here at top, just to kind of show you visually. Most people put this way at the top, and you go from there. And I gave you some examples, like in Judaism, the 3 absolute rules they are, you do not, and you can put this in the positive, like be honest, or you can put in the negative, do not lie. Does that make sense? I can say tell the truth or do not lie. It's the same moral value. In Judaism, the 3 absolutes are you do not murder, preserve human life. You do not murder, you do not commit idolatry, which is a form of being disloyal to God, and then you do not commit incest. Those are absolute, which means they would die before they did those things. And then there's a bunch of prima facie. In the Bible, a lot of people like to use the Bible, and I have a lot of things I'm going to say about that the last time we meet to give you some real, I think very helpful tips on that. But let's look just for a moment. I changed the way my mind how I want to do this. Let's look at some examples of rules in the Bible. So let's turn very quickly to Exodus chapter 20. Second book of your Bible. If you have a Bible app, you'll be there really soon. Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. This should sound a little familiar because I just preached on it. Exodus 20, 13 through 17. Exodus 20, 13, 17. This is one of the instances of the 10 Commandments. You shall not what? Murder. And it's murder, not just kill. The Hebrew is specific. It can be used for kill, but it means murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. And don't bear false witness. Don't covet your neighbor's house, and their donkeys, and all that kind of good stuff. Their Fuzzy's tacos. Because I do covet their salsa and their tacos. These are duties. Do not. You shall not means don't do it. Those are prohibitions, moral duties, obligations. These are right up the alley of a deontologist. So you can be a deontologist, and I say, number one, which rules do you choose? And I'm just being hypothetical. Teresa might say, my rules, my moral values or duties come from the 10 Commandments. And I'll say, great. Well, how do you, go ahead. And I might say, well, how would you give them weight? Which ones are the most important? And you might say, I think 10 Commandments are all absolute. That is, you're going to kill me before I commit murder, before I commit adultery, before I steal, you see what I'm saying? Those would be absolute rules. You might say, no, these are all prima facie. These are really important, but they're not absolute. I mean, sometimes I would steal. Sometimes I might murder. Sometimes I might bear false witness. Sometimes I might steal that Fuzzy Tacos. I mean, sometimes it might happen. But in general, I won't do that. It's prima facie. But you get to choose. Other people go to Leviticus 19:18. And here's another, and this is all through the Bible. I'm just giving you some really popular ones. These are the popular. You know Leviticus 19. You might not know that you know it, but if you're a Christian, you've probably heard this before. You shall not take vengeance or even bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yahweh. So, love people. Jesus said that, but Jesus didn't just say love your Jewish neighbor. He meant anybody who comes in who's in need. Let's go to the New Testament. Speaking of Jesus, let's go to Matthew chapter 5. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus has what we typically call the Sermon on the Mount. It's a collection of various lessons and sermons that Jesus gave, probably at various times, put together with Matthew. He talks about how don't murder, but I say don't be angry, don't cause a person to anger. Look in verse 27. I know you've heard it said it was old, do not commit adultery, but I say anyone who looks at a woman with lust has committed adultery in his heart. So these are rules. Do not do it. Look in verse 38. Well, I'm just skipping ahead very quickly. Look in verse 38. You've heard that it said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, don't resist an evildoer. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, turn the also. And he goes on for a while. So the moral duty would be you do not enact vengeance, ever. I go down to Romans 13:8 to 10. I could go on for a long time. So if you were a deontologist, you'd read the Bible, and listen here, every time there is a do not, or do this, one could establish a moral duty or rule. Every time it says don't do this or do this, you could establish a rule. And some people do that way. Some people live that way. I do that, actually, and I'll tell you why later on. It's not my first thing I do, but I care about it. I care about moral duty. I care about rules. I care about them from the Bible because I see the Scripture as a chief authority for belief and practice in a Christian's life. And I give real tips on how to read it, I think, responsibly later on. But nevertheless, this is a Bible way to do it. So I'm going to stop there, and before I repeat myself all over again, let me stop there and ask any questions or comments about deontology so far.
Different moral values?
If it's an absolute, can it be overridden? No. Absolutes cannot be overridden. Great question. It's the ace of spades, if you know your spades cards. Like, you cannot. I mean, this is a horrible situation, but a crazy person said, you can put a gun to my head and say, I'm going to kill your whole family if you don't kill Spencer. I'm gonna say, you're gonna kill me. You're gonna let your whole family die in front of your face? Yeah, and I'll see him after side, and you'll be punished by God for this, but I'm not gonna kill him. I won't murder. Won't do it. It's an absolute rule. Well, I'll kill you, and then to save him. Okay, kill me easily. Sure. That preserves my family's life and others' life. Sure, I'll do that. Yeah, absolutely. As C.S. Lewis said, there are many things worth dying for. Very few things worth living for. And I think this is one of the very things that's worth dying for. And that's not even a hard decision for me. I mean, how many parents would go, well, let me think for a second. Kill my kids or me? They're going to say, sure. Immediately. That's an absolute. I won't kill them. And I will have to work hard not to hate you the rest of my life because you killed them. But I'm not going to do it. So that's an idea of an absolute. Or you better go rape so-and-so, or I'm going to kill your whole family and eat them. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. You'll be liable to judgment for that, but I'm not doing that. Those are absolutes in my book. And I think they're absolutes. Well, you can ask me all that. I won't keep talking about myself. Good. This is good. How many of you did last time when I suggested, which is to start thinking about how you would weight your rules? Did you ever actually think about during the week? You might actually make a list. I said it'd be cool if you made a list of your various values or duties. Good job, students. Y'all failed. On Facebook, they all raise their hand. They're all very attentive right now.
I messed up before I even got back to my building.
Well, sometimes it's interesting to think about. I would encourage you Christians and even non to say, what do I really value? What really are? Do I have any absolutes? And if not, what are they? What are my prima facie? What are the things that are very, very, very important moral values that are very difficult to trump, but they're there? And then, of course, why do I have them? Why? If you're a Christian, I would suggest that your moral values and duties should chiefly come from the life and teaching and ministry of Jesus. That is, what he taught should be way up on the list. And I give you more guidelines later on. And I don't think it's always perfectly clear what to do all the time. But I do think we can make up our mind. And I just gave you some examples of my own life. And my mind is made up. I'm not going to do a murder. I'm not going to give up my faith. I'm not going to do it. So you can think ahead of time before these are horrible examples of torture and killing and murder, but what about things like helping your neighbor and so forth? Well, it's a rule. Jesus says, love your enemy. Pray for those. Pray for those who persecute you. Bless them. Do not curse. That's a rule. Jesus said, pray for your enemies, which means that's way up on the list. Are there times I should pray against them? The answer in my mind is no. It's an absolute rule. We should always pray for our enemies. There's never a time we should enact vengeance. And why do I think that? Because every time Jesus talked about anger or vengeance, every single time he said, don't do it. And every single time he said, pray for them. And then the guy I called my boss died on the cross for me instead of killing everybody who opposed him. So to me, it's an absolute rule. You absolutely pray for your enemies. You bless them. You do not curse them. You do not seek vengeance. You don't get even. You don't spread gossip about them. You don't say a bunch of hateful things behind their back. You don't slander. You don't libel, because that's not what Jesus wants us to do. So that's an absolute rule. I have several, but I get that. I think I get it from Jesus, and I think I'm right to make it as an absolute. There's never any gray ground on certain things for Jesus. They're just absolute. Doesn't mean I always want to do it, and I'll talk a lot about that later, because I don't always want to do it, which is why I follow the rule. But I'll talk later. I'm going to move on if there's nothing else there. Any questions or comments? Okay, the second thing is called consequentialist ethics, or teleological. Telos means end or result. And so, don't forget the big picture for a second. Someone comes and said, Roxana, how do I know what my moral duty is? Which one should I choose? She said, well, that depends on your ethical system. If you're a deontologist, you're looking for rules. If you're a consequentialist, you focus on the, of course, consequence. Or that's how it's a little more popular way of saying it versus teleological approach. consequentialist. The most popular form of consequentialism, well, I'll talk about that in a second, but consequentialist ethicists maintain that actions are not inherently moral or immoral, but their consequences are moral or immoral. A consequentialist says this: the end justifies the means. That is a consequentialist ethic, or teleological ethic. There are different kinds of consequentialists, but the most common, well-known, everybody talks about consequentialist ethic is called utilitarianism. It's the most common one. Actions which produce the most good for the most amount of people are good, and those that which produce the least amount of good are bad. They produce the most amount of utility. That's why it's called utilitarianism. That's kind of weird. Good is that which brings pleasure, happiness, or benefit, or the prevention of pain and suffering. That's usually how they define what helps good. It brings pleasure, happiness, or benefit, or it prevents pain or suffering. Utilitarians argue that we have an extensive negative responsibility. That is, the consequences of our acting or not acting are moral, and we are held responsible for both acting and non-acting. Where a deontologist says we don't have a high negative responsibility. They say, yes, you do. So, for example, back to that scary analogy of someone said, I'm going to kill your family unless you murder Spencer. I'm saying, I'm not going to murder Spencer. A deontologist says, high five. You didn't break your absolute rule because you said you're never going to murder. You did the right thing. You did the right, your moral duty was to preserve life, and you weren't going to do it, so you high five, you held your absolute rule. You don't have a negative responsibility, which is what you should have done of the consequence. Nope, because you obeyed your top rule. Consequentialist says, if you did murder someone and your whole family died because you didn't murder them, you're to blame. You did the wrong thing. And the deontologist says, wait a second, I had the absolute rule. I don't care about your absolute rule. The end result was your whole family got killed. How could you have let that happen? You have a negative responsibility, very, very high negative. How could you have let that happen? The end justifies the means. So you should have murdered. I mean, it's not the best. Murder's not what we want to do, but you would have preserved human life. On the other hand, of course you should have done that. And they're always going to argue that. They're always looking for the consequence, the end result. Now, the benefits of utilitarianism is that it is intuitive. It makes sense in daily life. Like not eating dessert is a greater good in being healthy. That is, I choose not to eat all those donuts because it has the consequence that I can live longer. I eat more protein because it has a result that. We do that in normal routines of life all the time. Most people do. I mean, most people, ideally. We don't do things, and it's intuitive. 2, it seems natural that we would want the majority to be happy for the greater good of the world. Most people would go, yeah, that makes sense. I want the most amount of people to have a better life. That makes sense. And C, it seems egalitarian, where everyone is completely equally valuable and treated the same. No one person outweighs others. That is, I don't want just white people to be happy or old people to be happy. I want the most amount of people to be happy. And that seems cool. And those are benefits. The difficulties are several. One is it's difficult or impossible to judge consequences or future events. You might think the immediate thing is going to happen, and that's true. But in the long term, on every single moral choice, that's just impossible. There's no way. You might think taking that job has a good benefit for your family the next year, 2 or 3, and that may be very true. You have no idea if taking that job is a benefit in 100 years. Because if you don't know this or have never really sunk in, every choice you make affects the future of the world. Every one of them. Because you got that job means someone else didn't get that job, which means someone else has a different job, which means they're interacting with different people, which means the things you say and do will impact the next people. I mean, it goes on forever. It is a gargantuan domino effect that only God sees. So utilitarian makes more intuitive sense in the short term of what we think might happen probably. But long term, there's no way, and it's impossible to tell down the road. Secondly, it's difficult to actually live out, to live out fully, completely. Namely, you must always calculate every single decision in life in relation to the majority of the people's good. Every time. So there's a car on fire. Should I go save the person or not? What affects the most amount of people? Back to John's comment, the clock's ticking, right? Last week he said, I didn't wait 30 minutes. Well, it's sometimes difficult. Every ethical decision all the time, what affects the most amount of people? That's difficult. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's difficult. 3, it's difficult in defining every possible good consequence. What about education? What about land? What about equality? What about beauty? There's all kinds of good things that might bring pleasure, and you might debate a lot about whether it's one is good or better than the other good possible outcome. Well, that's difficult. A 4th thing is all good consequences are not easy to weigh. What's the greater good, environmentalism or economic growth when we're drilling for oil? They're both good. They're both good, and they both help a lot of people. One, you get to breathe more. One, you get to make it and have all kinds of things when it comes to drilling for oil. Think of the oil and rubber and all kinds of stuff that's made, tires and military and on and on. So they're both good consequences, and sometimes difficult and consequential to figure out which one's the most important that affects the most amount of people. And this last thing is, or not the last forever, but I mean in our study, a question, a rhetorical but literal question. Do the ends always justify the means? Always? For example, stem cell research requires that you kill the embryo. It can require that you kill the embryo in order for others to benefit of possible cures. Well, does that mean it justifies the means really? It doesn't always have to, but it can be where you kill the embryo. You say, well, I don't know. Is that the best thing? So they go back and forth. Christianity has some strengths and weaknesses, a Christian view. Christians, most Christians would argue this through history, that Christians have a prima facie, that is most of the time obligation for utility, that is to help others and to avoid hurting them. It's kind of like a doctor, do no harm. Most Christians would agree with that. That's the Christian worldview, that by default, if I had a setting on my switches of my internal heart and mind, my default setting is help others, help them succeed, help them be successful, and don't hurt them. But there might be other times when God's will overrides utility. So look at some strengths and weaknesses, and then we're going to look at some biblical examples. Some strengths of utilitarianism from a Christian perspective. Well, it presupposes a world that is predictable to some degree because God has made things with cause and effect. It does presuppose a proper understanding of the world. What you and I do does matter. It matters. We'll look at some examples later, but when Jesus says, whoever causes one of these little ones to sin, it is better for him to have a millstone tucked around his neck and thrown into the sea. Whoever causes one is, and that verb is Greek, it is causes, the one who causes someone to stumble or to sin. What we do has an effect. And so the strength of utilitarianism is that it takes that seriously, is that there are consequences to our behavior. Secondly, it emphasizes the well-being of others, which keeps us accountable not to be selfish. That's a good thing. We're thinking about the greater good all the time. When I do the marriage retreat, and when I do marriage counseling, I do premarital counseling, I always teach them the principle that we have to move from with them to with who. What's in it for me to what's in it for us. And a healthy marriages focus on what's in it for us before they ask what's in it for me. And that's how it is in the Christian life. Well, utilitarianism makes us focus on the well-being of others, and that's a good thing. That's a Christian thing. Third, it does emphasize egalitarianism. It doesn't show favoritism to those who are rich or more educated. It's just the most amount of people. Y'all out there. And yeah, I said y'all. It's a strength of y'allness. I'm Southern. All right, letter B, weaknesses of utilitarianism. Well, human well-being is important, but there are many other things that are just as important and some that are more important, like devotion to God or self-control or purity or forgiveness. There's all kinds of moral values that are as important, if not more important, than human well-being. Well, that's a weakness of it, is that human well-being can't be the greatest good, but in general it's a good. And two, utilitarianism allows no limit on what people can do as long as it serves the betterment of the majority. Well, utilitarians fail to recognize that we have obligations to God as well as to our fellow human creatures. God is the ultimate value, not humans. So we can't do anything we can do as long as it betters, because that's just not true. I mean, God requires other things of us. And a utilitarian would say, and they don't matter. As long as it benefits the whole, it's all good. Well, Christians historically have said, no, it's not all good. There are other things, other moral values that we could list for a long time that are as important. Of course, last but not least, Christianity is more than just action and consequence. It includes character or virtue development. And so when you focus on rules or when you focus on consequences, you're not focusing so much on a person's character. And that's a weakness. Let's look at some examples of consequentialism in the Bible. So let's go back to our Old Testament. We'll go to Old Testament to New Testament like we did before. Deuteronomy chapter 28. Deuteronomy 28, 1-2. Moses is talking to the people of Israel before he goes and dies. They're about to go to the promised land. He's giving a big, fat, long sermon, basically, reminding them of the law. Deuteronomy 28, verse 1, he tells them the blessings if they obey God. He says, if you will only obey Yahweh your God by diligently observing all his commandments that I am commanding you today, Yahweh your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. All these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey Yahweh your God. So if then, it's an if-then relationship. If you'll do this, then you'll get blessings, God will reward you. There's a consequence involved. Go down to verse 15. But if you will not obey Yahweh your God by diligently observing all his commandments and decrees, which I command you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. That's a bummer. In a theocracy, that's what occurred. That is in this early. Joshua 1:8. Joshua 1:8. This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. You shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to act in accordance with all that is written in it. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you shall be successful. Now let's go to Matthew chapter 6, all the way to Jesus. Matthew chapter 6. Matthew 6, verse 2. He's talking about not practicing your devotion to God, your piety before people, for that reason. Verse 2. 6:2, Matthew 6:2. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Look down to verse 5. And whenever you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to stand in the streets and da-da-da-da. Verse 6, but whenever you pray, go where? Go to your room or your closet and shut the door and pray to your Father in secret, who sees in secret will reward you. Look at verse 16. And whenever you fast, don't look dismal, the hypocrites do, blah, blah, verse 17. But when you fast, put oil on your head, wash your face, put on some cologne and perfume, so that your fasting may be seen not by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who is in secret will reward you. Now go to Romans 13. Romans 13, 4 and 5. Romans 13. Apostle Paul is writing to the various churches in the city of Rome, Romans 13, verse 4. 13, 4. Actually, the end of verse 3, that's fine, I guess. Then do what is good, and you will receive its approval, for it is God's servant for your good. But if you do what is wrong, you should be afraid, for the authority does not bear the sword in vain. It is a servant of God to execute wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, be subject to the blah, 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 blah. The point is, he goes on for a while there about you make sure you obey basically the tax collector. I go on for a long time. I listed several other things. 2 Timothy 4:8, James 1:12, Ephesians 6:8, Revelation 2:10, on and on and on. Every single time there's a result or consequence given as a motivation. That's a kind of consequentialist ethic. Do the right thing because, now that's not the same as utilitarianism, because utilitarianism always argues that the consequence helps the most amount of people. You can be consequentialist and just think, there's a consequence that comes out, and I'm focusing on that, even if it's just for me. Utilitarianism says it's the most amount of people. That's under the same umbrella. Let me stop and pause. No, one more time. Big picture. We're asking, how do I know what my moral duty is? I'm a deontologist. I have a bunch of values, and I weight them, and I pick and choose that way. If I'm a consequentialist, I ask, what is the effect of my choice? What's going to happen in my choice? And most consequentialists are utilitarians, and they say, what affects the most amount of people? What brings them pleasure or goodwill and helps them and serves them? That's how I'll know to pick and choose which one helps the most amount of people. And that's why I'll choose which moral value. Yeah, whatever. No, I'm just kidding. Good. No, really, anything you repeat? Again, just real world questions. I mean, if I go up and say, what's the right thing to do in this situation? If you say, I don't know, what benefits the most amount of people? That's a consequentialist approach. Should I take that job or not? I don't know. What benefits the most amount of people? What brings the most amount of pleasure for a lot of people? Well, I could get a bigger paycheck or blah, blah, blah. But I got to know my family and I miss all my friends and it causes turmoil and it's demoralizing. Well, then what one down the road even further, what over the time impacts your family the most? Well, I don't know that much. Short term, I guess paying more bills is cool, but at the same time, all this is a big deal too. And so that's a consequentialist thought of what's the effect? What's the effect? Great. Do you have to be utilitarian if you're a consequentialist? No, you don't. Good question, though. In fact, the biblical examples I gave most of the time aren't utilitarian. Most of the time not, but they can be. It's more, God's going to reward you. He's going to fulfill his part of the covenant. You're going to be blessed. And they have no problem with being, there's a consequence, a good thing. It's not the only motivation, but it is a motivation throughout the Bible. Sometimes it is because it affects the people of Israel or, things like that. Good question.
Is following a commandment a moral thing?
Is following a commandment a moral thing?
Mm-hmm. Well, like the
So if a person says, go start my car, I'll give you $5, but it says, sure, is that a moral issue or is it not? That's a good question. My response is, to me, it's like you're asking, is every choice a moral choice? If that's what you're implying, the answer is no, every choice is not immoral. Some choices are all moral. Some people say amoral, but it's not immoral. The opposite of it, amoral means morally neutral. Like if I choose a pen or a pencil, that is an amoral issue. If I choose to take your $5 or not, it's not a moral issue.
well, really going back to your examples, like
Good. So when I read the Bible, well, the examples and the biblical examples are those moral choices. I hear my response is those are moral choices if we think the biblical commandments are authoritative for us. If we think they're authoritative for us, then we think they're moral duties to follow them somehow. Even if you don't think they're authoritative for us, then the question is, did the ancient Israelites think it was a moral duty to do what God said? Surely they did. That was a moral duty to obey God. And so in that sense, everything he told them was a moral choice. I mean, they wanted to follow him. And then sometimes the speakers will say, and if you do, it's going to be good for you. You'll get blessings. But if you don't, that's typical covenant language. And then when Jesus says the same thing, don't do it like that, but instead do it like this. As a Christian, I feel very much that I have the moral duty to obey him because he's my master. So that's why it's a moral issue immediately, whether or not I obey him or not.
so how about if you're a legalist?
If I'm a legalist,
Yeah, because a lot of times when we do things.
right? So is it legalism just to follow a moral duty even when we don't want to do it? Let me say a few things about that, if I can. I might say a little about repeat some of this the next time we meet. To be real clear, let's be real clear though. Legalism doesn't mean following rules. Legalism biblically means the idea that, the belief that, if I obey God's commandments, it gains favor from him. It somehow saves me. It gives me a relationship with him that I would not have had I not followed the rules. It's like Elaine saying, I will be married to you if you obey my commandments. But the second you don't, take the ring off. And that is opposed all of the time in the Bible, Old and New Testament, by the way. The Israelites never thought they were earning their salvation, as far as we can tell. And Christians never thought that. So in that sense, it's not legalism to follow the rules. And for the exact reason you just said, which is it depends on my motivation. So that's a different issue. What about the times, for example, I'm a deontologist oftentimes, and the reason why I want to follow the rules is because I want to obey Jesus, who gave himself for me and loves me and has changed my life. I want to do it, much like I want to make my wife happy. I want to serve her, not every second, nor I don't want to serve Jesus every second. But in general, I love her, and so therefore I want to serve her. And wanting to do it because I love him doesn't mean I'm trying to earn something from him. So in that sense, it's not legalist at all. But what about when I don't want to do it, even though I love Jesus, but I don't want to love my enemy or pray for those who persecute me? Well, then should I still follow the rule? Well, that's up to you, but a deontologist would say, and I would say, yes, you should. Why should I still pray for my enemy even when I don't want to? Because Jesus commanded it. That is to say, because I understand him as Lord, as boss, he has given me a moral duty that I must fulfill. I'm not fulfilling it to earn salvation. That's a motivation of legalism. Instead, I have two motivations. I'm repeating myself. One motivation is I'm going to pray for my enemies because I love Jesus and I want to obey him. The other is I'm just going to obey him because he's my boss. And I see no problem with either one. Neither one are legalism.
So if you go back to the Old Testament, and
That's a great question about the Old Testament. Asking what an ancient Jew thought is impossible. But in general, Jews did seem to have both. And I could give you multiple examples, particularly in Deuteronomy. It loves to talk, what we call the Deuteronomistic historian, the person or people who edited certain parts of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, 1 and 2 Kings, 1 and 2 Chronicles. One of the hands of the editors who compiled the stories, he, probably a bunch of he's, they do like the idea of talking a lot about covenant relationship as if you do it, you get blessings. If you don't, you get curses. That's like getting punishment. They like to talk that way. How much that represented a Jew 4,000 years ago, I'm not sure, but I think it's probably pretty true. The reason why is when you look at covenants of ancient world, that's how they talked. They did believe that the gods stayed in covenant on a conditional way. Having said that, what's so striking is that Yahweh in the Old Testament and all the texts speak so much about how he's not conditional. He has a right to be conditional. Like all the pagan gods were conditional. Yahweh will say it, but he says, but you're my chosen, I'm not giving up on you. Like Hosea 11. What am I going to do with you? I should just forget you, but I can't. I should just divorce you, but I'm not going to. And that's striking. And so he has the right to do it, but he doesn't. Even though he says, I'm telling you, Israel, if you mess up, well, then they mess up. And so, well, then is God lying? That's not how they see it. They see it as chesed, his steadfast love. He still fulfills his part of the bargain. So on the one hand, we have ancient Israelites seeming to think, I've got to obey the covenant, do the moral duties, because or else it's blessing or curse. But then you read text in the Old Testament, and especially, say, the Psalms. It's like Psalm 91. I love your laws and decrees. They go on and on about I love them. They give me life. They set me free. And so what we don't have in ancient Judaism, and not today for sure, is this belief that the laws are all onerous and horrible, and they're just trying to earn their salvation, and they're so burdened, and the law is just heavy burden. They think it's life. And so it strikes me as realistic to think if I interviewed a Jew from 3,000 years ago, I'd say, why do you do it? I think they'd probably give a similar answer I give about Jesus. They would say, because I love Yahweh. Have you known about him? He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He set my people free from Egypt, and I love him, and we're still set free. Do you always love him? Is that why you obey him? Well, no, I don't. That's not why I always obey him. Sometimes I do it because my daddy said I had to, and it's coming from the Ten Commandments. But because I respect him as the moral authority, as God, I'm going to obey him. I suspect they would see both. So my answer is yes, based on biblical examples. I'm trying to give you biblical examples of both that demonstrate that.
so what was the answer? Legalism or more?
Well, certainly not legalism. Well, I don't think so. I don't think at all. And most scholars today don't ever say that it's not a sense of legalism. We're hard pressed to find in the Bible where Jews believed this, and I would show you a place where I think it's there. You're hard pressed to find it, particularly the Old Testament, where Jews thought they were earning something. They really thought that Yahweh's covenant with Abram, then to Moses and David and so forth, was just gracious. They felt like God just chose them of all the people. They never thought they earned anything. It was just a gracious, phenomenal covenant that Yahweh chose of all people. What seems to have happened in ancient Judaism, and certainly by the time of Jesus, is that certain strands of belief in Judaism became that we are the chosen ones. And Jesus hated that, and Paul hated that. And that's exactly what Paul counters over and over. Don't think for, like in Romans 3, don't think for a second that you can say, or Romans 11, on and on he says, in Romans 9 through 11 particularly, that, well, we're Abraham's children. And Paul says, he can make these rocks being children. Don't think for a second that's the same. And Jesus said the same thing to certain Pharisees. So I don't think in general Jews thought they were earning anything. I do think there were strands of Jews who did start thinking that if you were not obedient to the covenant, you weren't in the covenant people. You just weren't there. And that's what Jesus and Paul countered. But I think in general they weren't legalists. I don't think in general Jews ever thought they were earning salvation.
The reason I asked,
Martin Luther argued that, and it influenced the church for forever. And that's why the standard preaching in almost every church is Jews are legalists, Christians are grace-filled. A standard practice in the pulpit. And it's absolutely standardly considered false amongst all scholars. You're hard-pressed to find scholars. Now, there are some out there, but...
the reason I ask is because it says, the blessing or the curse of the law.
Blessing of the curse of the law.
Associate with legalism.
Okay, so the law you would associate with legalism. Well, maybe, but I don't like the term there because one is they don't use that term. The Old Testament, they don't. The closest we get to that in the New Testament about following the law nomos, so they would call what Paul would call the works of the law. That's the closest thing we get to that. And to that he opposes over and over and over. I mean, read Galatians. He can't stand that. It's also in Romans and Philippians. But the works of the law is the idea that certain Jews apparently were thinking. This is debate in New Testament studies, but it's pretty standard. That certain Jews thought if you're circumcised, you obeyed the high holy days, and you obeyed your kashrut, the dietary restrictions, don't eat pork, don't eat this and this. If you did those things, it means we're different, we're God's chosen ones, and we're not like you dirty Gentiles. And it's a way to separate who's in and who's out of God's people, which is kind of like saying who's saved and who's not. And since we do these things, we have now demonstrated and made it the case that we're in the people of God. Paul comes back and says, that's not right. And some Jewish Christians agreed with that view, and Paul said, you're wrong too. It's not Jesus plus. It's diet Jesus. We don't need anything besides Jesus. It's not Jesus plus the law or obeying all that. It's just Jesus. And because he said that so much, people in his own congregation thought he was antinomian, that is, against the law. And he says, no. I'm not saying it doesn't matter what you do ethically. Yes, it does matter. Paul, you said it's all about grace. So apparently some Christians went, woohoo! They live like a bunch of pagans. He said, no, that's not either. And that's still 2017. I mean, it is about grace, and it does matter what you do. If you talk about what matters what you do, people say, you're a legalist. No, it doesn't. That's what Paul got charged the same thing. It is about grace, but, so I don't think it's legalist. About a law, technically, sure, but I just don't use the word legalist, because I think it drums up false beliefs. Thank you, Tom. I'm glad everyone else could eavesdrop on our conversation. Appreciate it. They're good questions.
Did I fill your time up?
Good questions. You did a great job. Now we're out of time. I'm just kidding. No, really, these are good. These are good. Anybody else want to jump in there too? Seriously? If not, we'll move on. It's really, seriously good. Very good. All right. Are y'all warm? Cool? Well, you open a window if you want. If it's warmed up, look at this. Seriously. You're comfy. Somebody's comfy. Well, feel free to open the window if you want. Or do a fan yourself. Okay. We on virtue ethics, is that right? Virtue ethics. This is the third major system. The third major system, in my perspective, in my humble opinion, is a good one. It's also a little difficult to nail down. It's a little more of the willy-nilly ones of all these. I'll just leave that up there. It's a little more willy-nilly. Virtue ethics says, to be a truly good person, it's not enough that one simply do the right things. You deontologists and consequentialists. You must also feel the right way and do the right things with the right motives and intentions. One must possess a certain kind of character. Character. That's a key word. I almost call this character ethics. Virtue and character. I'll tell you why. So they're going to ask, virtue ethicists ask this question, what kind of person are you going to be? Go back to my board for a second. I got a bunch of moral values in life. What's the moral duty to do? The ontologist says, pick a rule, lay a rule. Consequentialist says, how's it going to affect things or affect people if you're utilitarian? A virtue ethicist says, what? What kind of person are you going to be depending on which one you choose? It's about how it forms you. Jesus said in Matthew 12 about fruit coming from a certain fruit tree. Fruit is born. It bears out of a certain... Apples come from apple trees, not orange trees. And if you want apples, come on an apple tree. If you want to be an apple tree, to get apples, you got to shape your character into an apple tree. So that natural fruit comes out of your character. What is virtue? I'm glad you asked. Virtu in Latin. Virtue is from the Greek. Actually, it's arete. It means excellence. It does, actually. That's where we get the word. I mean, we get it from Latin, from the Greek. Arete means excellence. And it referred back then to an object's purpose or end. Plato and Aristotle talked about that. This eraser's excellence, its virtue. What's the purpose or end of it? And the way that relates is this, because virtue is a type of habit. It's a type of habit. What is a habit? Some of you have them right now because you're shaking your feet, you're brushing your hair, you're dozing off, you're playing with your glasses. Everybody's got habits. A habit is an inclination or disposition to act, think, or feel in a certain way. An inclination or a disposition to act, think, or feel in a certain way. Habits are tendencies or patterns. Therefore, a virtue is a habit to act, think, or feel in a way that disposes a person to its proper purpose or end, its excellence, its final state. Virtue is a habit to act, think, or feel in a way that disposes a person to its proper, or his or her proper purpose or end. So in virtue ethics, they talk a lot about habit formation, character formation, because those go together. If you want to shape your character, I'm telling you, sister and brother, look at your habits. That goes all the way back to Aristotle, and he was right. He was on to something. And that's the key. So virtue ethicists focus on the virtues becoming habits which form our character. You see that chain? Virtues becomes our habit, becomes our character. And it becomes our character, it's easier the next time to perform that virtue, which it becomes an ingrained habit more, which shapes our character. Over and over and over it goes. I mean, everybody knows that. The first time you lie, it's a little bit easier to lie the next time. A little bit the next time, the next time, the next time. When they teach boys and girls, well, I don't know if they even teach them anymore. I was taught a long time ago when boys and girls got together in physical things. I remember a guy named James Dobson talking about this. Every time you have a physical interaction with a boy or girl, back then it was just the opposite sex or gender, and then they would say, whatever it is you do on that date, the very next time you get together, guess what you're probably going to do as soon as you meet them? The exact same thing you're doing when you left off. That is, it's easier to do what you're doing before. So if you hold hands with them, the next time you see them, the first thing you're going to try to do, you're going to hold hands again. You're past that. Then you go to level 2. Then the second base, and third. Before you know it, the next time, what happens is it becomes easier to do it the next time. And that's exactly what virtue ethicists argue about our character. I want to say more about that in a second. So that's what virtue is. It's a type of habit. Elements of virtue ethics theory. Virtue ethics focus on the whole person, not just particular actions. So instead of just looking at our moral duty, as those deontologists and consequentialists do, they're looking at the person. Instead of discussing good and bad acts, virtue theorists discuss what makes a good or bad person, a person of virtue or vice. So the goal is moral formation, not whether it helps the most amount of people, not following a rule, but moral formation in my character. That's the goal. That's what they're going to say. And what constitutes good depends on a person's beliefs or their cosmology, their place in the world. If you believe in the Christian narrative, then certain virtues will exist in your value system that non-Christians don't believe are virtuous, like humility. Not every other belief system or pagan believes that humility is a virtue. Christians sure do. Christians believe that self-sacrifice is a chief virtue. Being a virtuous person means you give up, you deny yourself. Christians believe a chief virtue is serving other people. A chief Christian virtue is nonviolence, and on it goes. So it depends on your particular worldview. Letter B, virtue ethics places actions within the history of the person. Virtue ethicists, they fuss at those deontologists and utilitarians because they say, you make the human condition absent from moral questions. Should one go to war? Should one have an abortion? They say only humans make moral decisions. Humans have a type of character and a long history of decision making, like abortions for non-Roman Catholics and for Roman Catholics, or eating meat for vegetarians or non-vegetarians. People have a long history, so you're just focusing on one act, and you are ignoring the long history of a person and what they've been through. And they fuss at them for that. They also say, when you do something good, we might say, I can't imagine doing anything else. That's what a virtue is. That's the history of a person. It's like saying, I'm so proud you did that. How did you do that? Well, I can't imagine anything else. I helped that person. Well, I'm just a helpful person. Why did you hurt that person? I can't imagine anything else. I'm just so mean. There are people I think are convinced that way. That's all they do. Some people don't like to hear this. Some people are just punks. Some people are rude. Some of those are mean. Some people are jerks. Some people are completely self-centered. Some people get a lot of pleasure in hurting other people. Some people get pleasure in causing harm. And that's their character. They just can't imagine doing anything else. Some are the exact opposite. They love serving and helping and being a blessing. I just want to be a blessing. Well, that's a virtue ethicist, they would say is. That's what they were talking about. And then, of course, like I said before, virtuous persons are virtuous because they demonstrate a pattern of virtuous habits, not just instances, not just being kind or being honest. A virtuous person builds up a long character, like a big, thick tree trunk becomes who they are. So they look within the person, the history of a person that builds up a long person.
So can a virtuous,
Gotcha. Can a virtuous person be mean-spirited? In Christianity, they cannot be mean-spirited.
but if they were not, they could be, if they're not a Christian?
If they're not a Christian, they would have to think that being mean-spirited is a virtue.
Yeah, so so we're talking, that this is what we're talking about character building.
Right.
So
A
character
virtuous
building
character.
could be good or bad, whether you're a non-Christian or Christian.
So character could be good or bad depending if you're Christian or non-Christian. Maybe. Historically, even back to Aristotle, most would argue that, no, there are certain things we all know are virtuous acts to form a virtuous character. And that's back to those moral values, quite frankly. I would say, no, a virtuous person's honest and loyal and da-da-da. Later on, we're going to talk about, maybe even tonight, that they would even call them cardinal virtues, the things that every virtuous person. Christians and non-Christians, like I've already said, don't agree on all the virtues, that's for sure. And we don't agree on what the cardinal or chief ones are. But we can agree with some of them. But it'd be hard-pressed to find some that say it's virtuous to lie, or virtuous to be a coward, or virtuous to betray, or... I think it's going to be a lot universal, but some things are different. Some things are different. Letter C, for virtue ethicists, actions both reflect who we are and determine who we are. It works both ways. Our characters reflect our actions determine our character. Back and forth, back and forth. Physically, I try my best to go to the gym 5 days a week. And I try to stay in it to form a habit. Once I get a habit, I got to stay in it to keep the habit, which forms my body. But my body wants to go back, the more it just kind of gets a loop physically. Get a habit that helps me become a habit. Well, that's how it is with character. That's what they're going to argue. Letter D, virtue ethics focus on motivation and intention. The virtuous person does not just perform the right action and check it off the list. She does what is right with the right motive or intention. For example, here's some questions. If we said, deontologists and utilitarians argue that we should focus on action because actions are within our control. Are virtues like humility or courage always within our control as a desire? That's a question for a virtue ethicist. Are they always within our control? Humility and courage? Loving your enemy? I think they're not always in our control. That's a problem for virtue ethicists because they want to focus on motivation all the time. So they would say, if I don't want to pray for my enemy, that seems they might argue you need to practice the habit to get used to it. But if I still prayed for him, even when I didn't want to do it, they would say, yeah, but that's not that good. I mean, I'm glad you did it, but you did it for the wrong motivation. So they might say that kind of stuff. So motivation does matter a lot to them. Is it necessary to have the right motives for an act to be moral? What if I give money to a homeless shelter so that I get praise in the newspaper? Do I have to have the right motivation for something to be moral? That's a question. I don't know. What if we do something out of several motives or desires, especially if they are mixed morally? Like, I wanted to help the homeless people, and I wanted to get praise for being a generous person. I really do want to help, and I want to do it for praise.
If you go back to the scripture you read,
Yeah.
it says, don't let people know what you're doing when you give alms. I would say, no.
Right, so you go out to Jesus, don't let your left hand know what your right hand, you'd say wrong, that's right. But the point, if a virtue ethicist says you've got to have altruistic or pure motives all the time, this is one of those troubling questions for them to say, is it possible to always have pure motives all the time? Yeah, if you follow Jesus' commandment, the answer is no, you shouldn't do that. You can't.
We strive to.
We strive to. I agree with that. I agree with that. Virtue and sanctification. I use this terminology from the book. A lot of this, I think I told you, it's also in another page by Kyle Fedler called Biblical Ethics. He gives a list of this. The process by which a Christian participates in God's holiness. Holiness is a kind of a nebulous term. Holiness is defined as, a lot of Christians I've met, well, it doesn't matter. I want to make sure you hear me because this is correct. Holiness means basically that which pertains to God or the divine realm. That's it. That which pertains to God or the divine realm. And in the Bible, usually things that are holy are things. Pots are holy. Altars are holy. The Ark of the Covenant's holy. Priests can be holy, but that's because they work within the divine realm. You don't work your way up in holiness. That's how everyone teaches in church, not me, but that's how it's typically taught. You're unholy, you got to work up to your holiness quota, but that's not biblical, actually. Holiness means you act like God. You're in God's realm. So sanctification, or that's from the Latin sanctus, for holy or set aside, is like saying you're a holification. That is, there are certain things that, Chelsea, you and I can do in our habits that are just like God, that make us look like Him and act like Him. These are various virtues, and I give the whole list on purpose because I didn't want you to spend a lot of time. I don't want to repeat this and you have to write it down over and over. Like humility or meekness. Let me pause for a second and explain these, if I can do that. Is that okay? Are you with me so far? So these are various virtues in the New Testament. And these are all New Testament to keep it real simple versus, just keep it simple. Humility means to have a disposition of a lower social status, socially inferior. Now, in the ancient world, that's a big deal. Today in America, maybe not so much. But they use the word humble for slaves and servants. Children were humble. Slaves were humble. They behaved in a way assuming they were lower in social status than anybody else. And for Christians to claim this as a virtue is bizarre. The research I've done in both Greek and Roman literature, they absolutely frowned upon that. They said, do not be humble. You don't want to have the disposition of a slave because it's a slave, for crying out loud. And that's exactly the number one word Paul likes to use for himself. I'm a doulos. I'm a slave, a servant for Christ Jesus. Have this mind in Christ Jesus who is you, who submitted himself, humbled himself. And so we have this constant emphasis. Jesus himself said, take my yoke upon you because I am humble and lowly of heart. And so Jesus himself says, I don't come shoving it down your throat. I come humbly. It means I come at the disposition of a servant or a slave. That's a Christian virtue. It is a real big Christian virtue. That's why older Christians are told not to be haughty. Paul says that don't be haughty, don't be arrogant, don't think you're better than the people. Jesus says, if you invite people over, don't sit at the head of the table. And don't invite people who don't invite you back. Invite people who don't have what it takes to give you, invite you back. Like a servant. That is not like a rich host who can have big fat family parties. No, be the kind of person who invites people who can never ever return the favor as a character formation issue. That is, be that kind of person who doesn't only ask people who can scratch your back. So that's humility. Humility does not mean you think you're a piece of junk. Most people meet a person, oh, they're so humble. They're so smarmy. Oh, shucks, I'm a nobody. Well, no. I mean, you can think, I'm a nobody compared to you. Gotcha. Because Paul says in Romans 12, outdo one another in showing honor. That's a humble disposition. Please sit here. Please sit here. You're the best. That's wonderful. That's the one time we're told to be competitive that I know of in the Bible. Outdo one another in showing honor. Well, that's a humble disposition. That's not the same as saying bad stuff about you in your head. I counsel people about that. Brock's done that for 500 years too. It's not humble to say, I'm a piece of junk, I'm a nobody, I'm a worthless. That's not what we do. Maybe not. I thought, amen. No. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is, on and on and on. These are some examples, but forgiveness, Jesus, it's it's just a virtue. You talk about going against the grain of paganism. Will you get even? Woo! Christians don't. Christians are not supposed to. Christianity teaches you don't get even. You don't enact vengeance. Forgiveness means not to enact punishment. Not to enact punishment, and really you might even say not even want to enact punishment. That's what it means. Aphiemi in Greek means to let go or release, and that means to release the need to get even. Release the need to get even. Forgiveness, biblically, does not mean you fully healed from your emotional wound. That's a psychological definition, which I like, but it's not implicit in the biblical text. The biblical text means I'm not going to want or desire or enact vengeance. If someone accidentally ran over, hit my family in a car and killed them, car accident, I might, the police might come in, the person who did it takes him to jail. There's natural consequences. But for me to forgive it means I don't want to go kill them myself or enact vengeance or make sure they see punishment forever and ever. I might grieve for the rest of my entire life, but that doesn't mean I haven't forgiven them. And they're different. And I'm going to do a whole study on forgiveness, but that's just a quick nutshell. Patience or long-suffering means, of course, those are different words. It's actually a lot of times in translation it says patience. I like the old long-suffering. We don't say that much in these days, but long-suffering is a little better because it means the ability to endure through a difficult situation or circumstance until the end. The ability to endure it. You can be patient, and that can not the same. Patient, I mean, I'm not that anxious while I wait. But long-suffering means I'm enduring it. It's this issue of endurance through a hard situation. And that's mainly what it's really going at. But patience is fine. But hope is, of course, holding on to something that you believe is to be true, even though it's not manifested right now. I hope to live a long life. I hope my children have a great educations and live like Jesus the rest of their lives and whatever. And the Christians have a hope as well. And it's not seen, but it's certain, as it says in Hebrews. Courage, having faith. I'm going to go pretty quick now. Generosity is pretty clear. Having sympathy or compassion. I like the Greek word there. It's splagnoi. Splagnoi means your guts. In the ancient world, forever, people felt with their guts and thought with their heart. We feel with our heart and think with our head. Most people think that, right? But in the ancient world, you felt with your gut. When we say the word gut-wrenching, that's thousands of years old. When Jesus says, he looks upon him and he felt compassion for the crowd because they were like sheep without a shepherd. It says he felt it in his splagnoi, his guts. He hurt for them. He felt deep compassion, sometimes translation says. That's what Christians are supposed to have for other people. Compassion. Little footnote. This is very common for a certain kind of person, and Brock can probably say more about that. Certain people, when you say, I'm sorry to hear that for you, and they go, why? You didn't do anything. But I know I didn't do anything. To say I'm sorry is a common American colloquialism. Means I feel empathy for you, or I can sympathize, which means I also have felt that as well. I just meet people all the time in church world, particularly, who I think they feel, and this not even just Christians, but they're very bad at receiving sympathy and empathy. They say, I don't need your what? I don't need your pity. Well, that's a pride issue or a wound issue. It's some issue, but it ain't a healthy issue. Christians are supposed to feel compassion. They're supposed to. There's something wrong with you. You go, you're right, I don't care. I should never said it. You're cold-hearted punk. There's something wrong with you if you don't have deep sympathy or compassion. It also says something ain't just right either with you if you resist that. And some people are profound J.J. Watt defense players or ninjas at blocking anybody's sympathy. I'm just encouraging, if you're that kind of person, you are missing out. God can encourage you and bless you if you will receive people's compassion. Let them help you. Let them encourage you. I don't ask for other people. Whatever. But you're missing out. And you're certainly missing out if you're not trying to be compassionate to other people. Sympathy matters. Compassion matters. Empathy matters. So try to get good at that, receiving it. And if it's a pride issue, oh my goodness, get rid of that. Pride is stupid. horrible. It is. I mean, it's stupid. Pride is a stupid thing to even have. You're not anybody. It's ridiculous. God is a somebody. The pride's ridiculous. My sermon's over on that. Love.
Amen.
Love, thank you. Thank you. I get one. And I love you for it. That's my next one. I love. To make this very clear in a culture that no longer knows what this word means, biblically, there are different understandings of the word love. The most common number one way love is used in the Bible, I'll just focus on the New Testament, is the word agape. And I don't care if you know this Greek word, I don't give a rip. But agape love is a kind of committal love. It means to care for the good of. To care for the good of in most instances, most of the time. And I can tell you what it doesn't, but that's another long story. In fact, I did a whole sermon series on this. Go back and listen to it. It was phenomenal. And that was kind of a joke. But I did a whole sermon series because well, David, we're told to love everybody. Yes, we are. Love means to care for their good. A very different kind of love, you know your Greek word, is eros. That's erotic love. Eros love is not agape love. We're given very clear stipulations on the kind of erotic love we can have. Very clear boundaries. Very clear boundaries. We're not given boundaries on agape love. Everybody is agape love. Not everybody is eros loved. And that depends. And there's different kinds of other kinds of love out there. But agape love, caring for the good of, is absolutely standard Christian practice, and it is over and over and over and over in the New Testament. Honesty, Ephesians 4:25. I'm just going to read it because I live in a culture where everybody's a bunch of liars. I don't get this. A bunch of liars. I'm being out of season. Nobody here. It's other churches. A bunch of lying. I'm just kidding. So then, putting away falsehood, Paul says, let all of us speak the what? Truth to our neighbors, for we are members of one another. Tell the truth. Gentleness, but do it gently. Colossians 3, gentleness, his spiritual gentleness. I love when he says in Galatians 2 that when you go to tell the person, to help the person who's caught in sin, do it in a spirit of gentleness. And I could give tons of more Bible verses. I just quoted one that's not here, but gentleness is a powerful, powerful thing. So we're going to be honest and be gentle at the same time. Kindness, self-control. Self-control is a virtue. I did a podcast on addictions. If you want to hear more about that, and I know Brock's a licensed therapist. I keep picking on Brock because I know a lot of these things fit in the licensed therapist part. I did a podcast on addictions and whether or not they are sins. I do not think addictions are sins at all. I think addiction is a disease. Where a sin comes in is when a person who is in enough rational state of mind and refuses to get help. They choose the addiction over the help. That's when a person is choosing not to have self-control. Now, and I say this in the podcast, about 30, 40 minutes, so I nuance all this, nuance it. It's not always so perfectly clean. I'm fully aware, even when a strong addicts are lucid, there's still a little bit of that drug calling out to them, and I get it. But in general, what's issues is self-control, and I think those are different. I think the very self-control, when you cannot help it, I do not think is a New Testament virtue. If you have a disorder where you randomly scream out cuss words, and you cannot control it, well, you're sinning, you don't have self-control, that's a different issue. It's not people who are victimized. And I do think that when a person's an addict, they are, in large part, a victim, which is why they need to get treatment. And victims aren't sinners, not sinning when they're victims. That's not my biblical view of it. Joy in the morning. Joy means basically being very happy. I'll do a sermon series next year on that. Joy is, I've done so many studies, I've just changed my mind on this issue. Tom, can you believe it? No. Yeah, well, I do. And I know I do really have a lot. Because I used to say joy is a state of mind, and I used to say all that, and then I just read the Bible, and amazing. It's not. In the Bible, people are joyful when there's something over which to be joyful. Joyful news, joyful outcome, joyful something. They're happy. But they're not happy all the time. They're not joyful all the time. But Paul always gives them reasons, and Jesus and others, reasons to be joyful. So it's not that we have to maintain a constant state of, yay, happy, joy. No one lives that way. Well, you could, I guess. You might need a psych ward. Most people don't live that way all the time. But Christians can and should focus on the things that give us joy. See the difference? They're very, very different. We can focus on worry and trying to control and vengeance and blah. Or we can focus on letting things go and being releasing and grateful, and that brings us joy. We can go on for more, but these are some key ones. Let me say this last little bit, and we'll do Bible, and then we'll be done. In the ancient world, there are cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, or self-control. Those are the biggies. Aristotle, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. Did I put those on your? Yeah. Ancient world. Plato, Aristotle, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. These are ancient Greek and Roman philosophers. They all agree that the big and most important cardinal or chief virtues are wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. I think these are good things, but in Christianity, that's not the top. But it wasn't in all the literature. In Christianity, there are big three that are used throughout the New Testament as the top big dogs. I think they're safe to say these are three Christian cardinal virtues. Paul says it succinctly in 1 Corinthians 13:13. And these are the three, and you know them: faith, or you might say trust, intellectual assent, and emotional psychological belief. That's both and. I trust my wife because she's trustworthy because I know her. It's not a blind faith. I trust her. I have faith in her because I know her. That's what it is with Christianity. I trust Jesus because I know enough of him that he's to be trusted. That's a chief virtue. And you say, well, that's just crazy for Jesus. It's not crazy for my wife. I want her to trust me. I want her to have faith in me. That's a bedrock foundation of our marriage. If we don't have that, it's a very weak marriage indeed. So it's like with Christianity. It's a chief virtue to believe in Jesus. 2, hope. Hope, trusting what we know to be true, regardless of our changing emotions. It's kind of what Lewis said with faith. And of course, 3rd, not least, is love. He said the greatest of these is love. Love, hope, faith. There's all kinds of other key things we could talk about in the New Testament, and I listed several already. We could talk about forgiveness more, talk about humility more, we could talk about joy more, all kinds of things. We could talk a lot. Just for time, let's focus on the New Testament this time. Let's look in Matthew chapter 5, go back to the Sermon on the Mount, just for giggles. Matthew 5:14. 5:14. These are examples, you might say, of character or virtue ethics. You are the light of the world. By the way, that's what Jews said about themselves. That comes from their prophets, I think particularly Isaiah. Jesus says, no, my followers are the light of the world. Not you ought to be the light of the world. You are. If you're my disciple, that's who you are. You are walking flashlights in a dark world if you are a disciple of Jesus. Now, you should be. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. In other words, instead of saying, we should all just light our shine, it can be hid. It ain't going to happen. By the way, that's why they get persecuted. Because you can't be hidden. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket on the lampstand and gives it light to the whole house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. You are that, and that's why that's part of your character. It's who you are. And I love Galatians 2:20. You know this one if you know your Paul. Galatians 2, classic. Galatians 2:20. One of the best Christian songs ever written, in my opinion, came out of these verses by Philip Spring-Dean, called Crucified with Christ. Galatians 2:20. Galatians 2:20 and 21. Well, I'll start in verse 19 because I want to. 2:19. For through the law I died to the law so that I might live to God. I have been what? Crucified with Christ. And it is no longer I who live, but it is Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Whew. Did you hear that? I do not nullify the grace of God, for if justification comes to the law, then Christ died for nothing. I am a nobody, he's everybody. I've been crucified with Christ. Whether I'm at work, at home, at the gym, at the grocery store, you're not talking to David. You're talking to a disciple of Jesus, and I crucified him. Romans chapter 6. Romans 6. Paul says to the Romans, and it's Romans 6:11. Romans 6:11. This whole section's wonderful. I remember I read this part. I read this part to Chelsea back when she was going to get baptized a little over a year ago. We were talking about the point of baptism. Romans 6:11 and following. We'll start verse 11. It says, "So you must also consider yourselves" what? Dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. He's in you. Therefore, do not let sin exercise dominion or power or authority over your mortal bodies to make it obey your passions. Don't do that. Don't present your members to sin as instruments of wickedness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life. And present your members to God as instruments of righteousness. Sin will have no dominion over you, since you're not under the law but under grace. It matters what you do with your body and your genitalia, and your eyes, and your tongue, and your ears, and your hands. He said, don't use your body parts for sin. Don't you know who you are? The old you is dead. Don't go back like an old zombie, pull up a dead corpse. Don't do that. I go on to 1 Corinthians 6:9-11. Some of y'all are thieves, this. But that's not who you are anymore. 1 Corinthians 6:9-11. Ephesians 2:11, on and on. There are tons of examples in the New Testament. Tons and tons of various virtues. I want to stop there. Any questions or comments as we wrap up? Wisdom, or they might say prudence, but wisdom, what's four actually? Wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Or you might say self-control. It's a great question. As followers of Jesus, which moral system are we supposed to follow or use, or does it switch? That's a very good question, and I answer that exactly on your handout. But it'll be there next week. But my response is yes. That it's in Roman number 3, bullet point 3. But we'll talk about this next time as well. Biblical authors can switch their ethical system they choose. And I'm going to look up Ephesians later on. All three are biblical. Now, I put systems in quotation marks because at no time would Jesus or Paul or James or John say, no, I'm going to virtue ethics. No, I'm a day on top. Right. It's not. It's our putting onto the system. But still, to help us bring clarity, all three, as I've been trying to demonstrate, they're all biblical. So which one should we choose? Honestly, the Bible doesn't tell us which one we should choose. I think, and I'll say this next time as well, my opinion is, and many Christian ethicists argue this too, that if there is one main one that Christians should use the most, it's virtue ethics. What forms the character? And I say that too, and then a close second for me, but a close one is deontology. I think consequentialist is last, on purpose. My problem with that, though I very much believe what I just said, my problem with that is virtue ethics, in my opinion, give me a better moral reasoning for my motivation than it does my moral duty. Deontologists give me a better things for my moral duty, in my opinion. Virtue ethicists tell me why I should want to do what I do. In my whole, they might disagree with me, but that's fine. Because even as a virtue ethicist, I'm still going to say, okay, I want to inculcate my character. And I do want to kill, oh my goodness, and I'll say this later on. I've crucified with Christ, His Holy Spirit. I want to do what the Holy Spirit wants me to do, period. Most of the time. But I don't want it all the time because I still sin sometimes. I still don't want to do. But on my good days and my good moments, good hours, I want to do what He wants to do. I don't have Christian character. Great. Then my next question is, what does that mean? What's the virtue I'm picking up? Well, as soon as I do that, I'm listing moral values, which is fine, but I'm saying which one inculcates the most character in me. And I don't think that always answers the question in the moment. For example, my burning car analogy or scenario. The car's burning and you're out there burning the car, and my instinct says, run! I've got a family to take care of. Another says, help her. In character ethics, I might say, they might make an argument that I shouldn't help you. I should do what I can, but do what I can to preserve my life because it helps form my character to serve, but at the same time, I don't want to. But at the same time, someone else saying, you better go help even if you die. And if you don't, you're wrong. The virtue ethicist might say, but yeah, if you end yourself, there's no more character to have. Others might say, no, it is good for your character when you die. But, they just go, that's... So I think virtue ethics helps me the most when it comes to motivation. and in my opinion, and deontology helps the most on the duty. But they go close together, in my opinion. And John brought this up last time. He said we should always do, I'm paraphrasing, but we should always do what's most like Christ, and we should ask his opinion, and we should pray for it. Absolutely. And I said, we'll talk about it next time. Well, it is next time now. I completely agree with John that I think the Christian response should be, in general, genuinely, what forms my character, my habit formation, to inculcate Jesus' very character. What do I got to do to be like him? Whatever it is, I'm going to do that. And I'll say this later. And then when that's not so clear, I go to deontology. When that's not so clear, I go to consequentialist. That's what I do. It doesn't have to be what you do, because they're all biblical. I mean, we can go to more.
Okay, so if the virtue ethics
Yes.
is a progression, virtue, habit, character. It's the
Yeah, a
progress.
virtue is a kind of habit that forms our character.
But could the moral values, if we followed, if we went east,
If we tried to do them all the time, can they, back to the question, can these moral values turn into habits? Yes. And by the way, it drives me a little crazy in ethics because they don't always use the same terms.
yeah,
They don't. I prefer to call moral values, virtues, the same thing.
okay.
Same thing. So if I choose, like, being loyal is a Christian virtue, I would argue, versus being a betrayer or disloyal, backbiting, whatever, that'd be disloyalty. Well, so should I be loyal or disloyal? I should be loyal because it's the right thing to do, because also I need to do it all the time, as often as I can, to form that kind of character where it's easier the next time to be loyal, next time to be loyal.
Yeah.
So that's why for me, virtue ethics gives me a better idea of motivation more than it does which one I should choose. If that makes it, well, that makes sense to me.
Seems like to me they're kind of, you could intertwine them.
They're very, I think they're very
To form
intertwined.
your character.
Yeah.
Is if you use the moral values to help shape your habits,
Yes.
then that develops your character.
Yes, yes.
So
It's the
not
cycle.
like
That's the
you're
circle.
Putting
Yes.
two different ones together.
Yeah, except this is where, and this is where Tom was getting a little confused last week too. What's blended together is that there are moral values, but that's common in all three. They're not blended together in that deontologists say it doesn't matter if it shapes your character. It is irrelevant.
Yeah.
It matters because they're intrinsically good or bad. Virtue ethicists say, no, they're not intrinsically good or bad. They're good and bad as much as they shape my character to be virtuous.
Okay.
Does see, that's the big distinction. Deontologists, I don't care if you have character or not. If you're loyal one time in your entire life, so what? You should have been loyal in that moment, depending on how you weighted the rule. Doesn't matter if it forms your character. Virtue ethics says, yes, it does matter if it shapes my character. Consequentialist says, y'all are all crazy. All that matters is the Yeah, but they're all appealing to the same values. Again, its issue is which one should I choose and why? And that's, so what overlaps is they're all believe in moral values. At least that's what I've argued the first few weeks, is that we all believe in the same kind of moral values. The issue is the moral duties are where we start disagreeing. That's why I have ethical systems. Which one should I choose? But even if you're not clear on which one to choose, and I'll end on this, just to make sure it's as clear as I can be, even if we're not clear on which one to choose, we're still all clear that we ought to choose something. We all feel an impulse to do the right thing. And that's what the old people used to call the moral law. Something tells us you ought to do the right thing. We might disagree on what the right thing is, but we all feel that feeling of you ought to do the right thing. And that's different from saying, I just sneezed or I'm hungry. It's a sense of I ought. I ought. And that's real. David, values are all different. People disagree all the time. That demonstrates you feel oughtness because we want to do the right thing, and that's why we're passionate. Because we feel a sense of, if it wasn't oughtness, no one gives a rip. It's just, you like chocolate ice cream, I do too. No one argues about that, unless you're silly or being crazy. But we do get passionate about things we think are right and wrong because we think we ought to do the right thing. That's that moral law. And so what I'm saying is the reason why people pick and choose which oughtness they do, that depends on your moral system. And I ought to close us. Let me pray for us. Thank you, God, so much for loving us. Help us inculcate in our character everything, Jesus, that is of you. You are everything. You really are. You've saved us, set us free from our old selves. You gave us hope and purpose and love, and you are gentle, and you're loyal. You're faithful. We thank you. For my sisters and brothers in Christ in this room who are discouraged, please encourage them. For those who need clarity, give them clarity and peace, please. For those who need wisdom, give them wisdom, please. Spirit, guide us. Help us have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and help us. Because God, sometimes being around family or friends at Thanksgiving meals, Christmas and so forth, can bring out the worst in us. Because family and friends aren't always the great influence. Help us be the light that we are and the salt of the earth that we are, in gentleness, not in condescending, haughty arrogance. But help us, Lord Jesus, be like you, and help us not let any kind of negativity or nonsense that family drama can cause get the best of us. Help us not give in kind. Help us not pay back vengeance for vengeance, but love. Really, just like you have loved us and never paid us back in kind, and still don't. Thank you. In your name we pray. Amen.